Welcome to the Pander Brothers podcast. I'm Jakob.
I'm Arnold.
And we just released our indie thriller, Altered Ego, and are making this series of podcasts on the life cycle of making an independent film. Today, we're going to be talking about location scouting and locking all the locations and really creating the world that the film takes place in.
Yeah.
And so
The character that is
the character that is
landscape,
that
the
is the architecture, that is the setting.
I mean, it's a film about architecture, so we realized that was going to play a big role early on. And so we sort of put it off a little bit. We were like, okay, this is going to be something we're going to have to really wrap our heads around, which we did.
We shot this film in Portland. So, story of a self-absorbed, up and coming architect who gets his identity stolen, and is very modernist, minimalist kind of aesthetic. And Portland, of course, up to that point, was really known for the films of Gus Van Sant that are these very gritty urban stories that really show off that kind of classic Portland look of a
like
kind of
under bridges,
industrial town, old town, and bricks and old brick buildings and old water towers. Yeah. And when we started to put this universe together of Altered Ego, we knew that we wanted to create this very sleek, modern architectural world, of which there's not a lot of that in Portland, but there's areas in town where there's been quite a bit of development that have lended itself to more modern architecture. And modern
At the time,
buildings.
it was a lot of money had gone into the Pearl District, which before that had just been the industrial area.
Yeah.
But within just a few years, just condos started popping up one after the next, and it was kind of amazing to see because I had left town for a few years, and I'd come up and visit, and it was like, whoa, what's going on here? And it really had transformed.
So when we were in pre-production, one of the big, and in particular with locations, and we had a location scout working with us, and the first big ask was, we want these particular types of locations, but we don't want any bricks, so no bricks. We wanted this kind of
glass and steel,
paint. Just by the choice of framing, almost recreate what Portland was. If you were to see only this movie, you would think Portland was an absolutely different looking city than the city you might come away with watching a Gus Van Sant film or even visiting.
We were calling it Neo-Portland for a minute.
Neo-Portland.
We've created this sort of alternate reality because we're only seeing it through the lens of our character, Dylan.
Yeah.
And so his version of the city and his world is just this kind of clean line, stark sort of aesthetic, and he embodies that too. So a lot of even the camera choices, just the compositions and environments really were intentionally.
It's almost like an extension of his of his mind and his hyper design aesthetic and designed life.
So really, Dylan embodied this environment of the Pearl District for us. This is where he would live. This is where he would potentially work, and most of his life was operating in this space. While writing the film, we had reached out to a friend of ours, Stephen Ewald, who was an architect who had a small firm of his own, and we'd reached out to him basically to give us consultation, like just the language, the vernacular of architecture, and just to make sure that
get his feedback on the
just get his feedback on the script, and if this is the way architects would speak to one another, and some of the terminology and so on. So he'd been really helpful in that stage of the project. So we reached out to him again now that we were looking for a way into this architecture world. And he
made an introduction to a larger architecture firm that turned out had developed a portion of that Pearl District area. And that started to open some doors for us and also make connections to other architecture firms. And so the first big challenge for us just kind of aesthetically, structurally, in terms of like the location that we were after. The first big one that was really important was the residence of Dylan, our lead character.
Where does he live?
Yeah, where does he live? And not just where does he live, but this part of the story, it was almost like a Hitchcock's Rear Window, where a big part of what was going on was the logistics of how he was seeing a neighbor that lived across the way, which turns out to be this the airline attendant who he happens to meet at this airport, and then happens to end up living across the way from him in this condo in the Pearl District. So there was some specific logistics that limited what kinds of buildings or locations that we could use. We couldn't just use a single building, but it had to be a building that had aspects physically to it that would allow you to look across the way to see the neighbors.
Right.
And
we in our minds saw like, oh, could it be almost like a mirror of all these windows, people living in their cubicles and so on, or is it something else? In a lot of ways we didn't have complete control. We were a little bit at the mercy of what locations we could even access.
Yeah. And we
was already a tall order.
And we started by just driving around the city in general.
Yeah, just looking
at like what is that building? Who owns that building, or who runs that building? Who how could we kind of get in there and hit a fair amount of dead ends early on, but it was through Steve and then through his contact that worked at this big architecture firm, who it turned out had been involved in creating and designing this building right in the heart of the Pearl District that became the location, the prime location. And what we discovered was in these condominiums, in these condo buildings, there would be these showrooms. And these showrooms were constantly there as empty or furnished,
but nobody's
living there.
Yeah.
As potential locations. And so an introduction was made, and we got into this building across the way from their architecture firm, actually. And we were able to go in and look at this space, and it was incredible because it was like, holy smokes, this is exactly what we're kind of seeing in our minds.
At least for the apartment.
The aesthetics.
But there was no building across the way.
There was no building across the way. Although,
however,
it's kind of like almost like a horseshoe.
Right. It turns out there was it was a horseshoe building, and there was a courtyard.
Yeah.
And in the courtyard were these, I think on either side, were these townhouses.
Yeah, these lower
kind of like
two-story townhouses.
Yeah, that were kind of unique into themselves. And but they were, I think the showroom was pretty high up, so it was like way kind of a steep angle, like it'd be a sort of a you might be able to see someone in the window, but it wouldn't be you might need binoculars, and that would be creepy. So
but the general layout was getting close. It was close enough that there was the potential to kind of fake it.
You're right.
In that if we could film in that showroom, which was way up high, but have our character's sight line be such that he was maybe looking down one floor, then maybe we could get access to an apartment way down below to just film the exteriors of his point of view, which is what we ended up doing, and it worked great. However, those townhouses were fully occupied, and we couldn't get into them.
Right.
Although in the script, there's all these scenes written within those spaces. So we had like 3/4 of our location,
right?
But
so it was like so we got to get in the townhouse so that we can have that whole scene play out, and then we kind of like went, okay, well, the one thing about these buildings is there's a bit of a kind of they had similar design aspects.
They're all being built in the same era.
A lot of the same kinds of windows and a lot of the same like vertical blinds, which is kind of became part of the aesthetic, which was a byproduct of these locations. But there was really this sense of like, okay, well, maybe there's a townhouse somewhere else. Now we just have to find a townhouse that can kind of match. And so At that point,
Some other introductions were
other
made.
introductions made, and we met another
continued, yeah,
another. It
looking.
wasn't actually it wasn't a architecture firm, but it was a
Developer,
developer,
yeah.
and the developer was
They were just finishing a building.
right in a different area that was similar to the Pearl District. It was kind of on the waterfront, and they were kind of creating almost a mini city over there in the southwest waterfront area of Portland. So, and again, these gleaming condos that were really slick, and a number of them were still under, under construction because it was kind of a new push that we're doing. So yeah, so we met with the developer in that area, and there, happened to be this townhouse, and lo and behold, it had the exact identical layout of the one that
Yeah.
at the other place.
Yeah,
So
but it was like a
the-
2-story townhouse that was kind of similar
right,
size.
similar size. It had that the way that where the door was, where the window was, where and the vertical blinds were, was like, okay, that's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Now, if you looked out that window, you'd see something completely different, but.
We'll keep the blinds closed.
We'll keep the blinds closed. It's a workaround.
Yeah.
And so that, we were like kind of putting it together like puzzle pieces, with city blocks, and it became kind of, it was stressful, but it started to kind of come together, and we just had to be inventive. There is one shot, I think it's where Yuling opens the blinds and you see the building that Dylan lives in, and that was because we got one day where we could shoot out of the window for that. But that was beside the point. The main point was that we had these two locations, but we had to match them.
Yeah, and just find a creative way to also block out those scenes, storyboard those scenes, so that we could make those two completely different physical locations appear to be really all one and the same space. So that was cool. So we had locked in. That was a major primary location that we'd locked in, and then throughout our connecting with other architects and architecture firms, we were also able to get an actual architecture firm's interior to be able to shoot the main architecture scenes in our film in terms of the
which was great because
architects.
It allowed Dylan and his colleagues to all be having their meetings and having their party and having their drama within an actual architecture firm, and that was really neat because it just really helped get them in character ultimately.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to the other situation we had that was related to the condominium, getting into that space and accessing that was
right. We found the right location for that extra townhouse. Now we had to actually get them to commit to letting us use the townhouse.
We were looking at it,
we were like,
this will work.
This could work.
But we still had a hurdle, which was, they didn't. Who are you guys, and what is this film you're doing, and what is this?
And these are also like townhouses that are. It's like a brand new car.
Right.
Like these are pristine things that are about to be put on the market that they don't want any dings in the walls or
That's
nothing.
Right. And they're trying to sell them as condos. These weren't rentals.
Yeah.
So, and right. So
high risk having a huge film crew just roll on in.
Exactly. 20 people traipsing around boots in January. So we had to do some sweet talking. I don't even know. We were song and dance. And so, what was interesting about that was the developer, he was, established guy, had been, real friendly, and we were talking about our production and the nature of it and the nature of the story and trying to get him, on board. And he just kind of out of the blue mentioned that his son had just graduated from film school, and maybe
from Columbia or something.
Yeah, somewhere like high level school. And and now he'd graduated, and then it was kind of, he was, like, now what? Now what do you do with this degree, with this movie degree? And I was like, well, and I don't think it was kind of a spontaneous moment. It was like, well, why don't we just bring him on board, bring him in as a PA? And it was very spontaneous. It was like, because we had to it was on the fly. There was no huddle. It
Mm-hmm.
was just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, let's bring him on board, so he can have a real experience, filmmaking experience. And that pretty much did it. He was like, okay, that would work for me. And so
Yep.
then, that he was on board. So within the same meeting, it was like, well, okay, what are the logistics of getting into the space? And he obviously had his concerns about safety and damage and all that, but there was also just the politics of
Yeah, there was the one other big hurdle that was not necessarily, it was like it was in his control right now, but it was soon to be out of his control.
that's right, because there's once people move in, or a certain amount of people move in, it goes from the developer having sort of the say in things
Mm-hmm.
to a kind of a renters
Homeowners association
homeowners
suddenly
association
taking control of the building.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and that was going to happen in a matter of like weeks. And we were pretty much about a week away or so from
Mm-hmm.
production. So, as a result of that logistic, that was our first location.
Yeah. Because
And
those condos were being sold as the production was going.
Right.
And so yeah,
any day that it would flip, and
we
they
might
may
lose
not.
that location.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this was like, there were areas in this place where they were, I think there's a hallway we gained access to at one point, and literally they had to peel the plastic off of the rug.
Mm-hmm.
It was that new. So,
Yeah.
that there was this, you really felt, I mean, it was a very special, I felt it was a very privileged situation to suddenly be in, but, we wanted to honor it. We put cardboard everywhere, and it was, we really had to make sure we didn't damage anything. But that was, one of those kind of time crunch situations too. And a lot of it, we find that, with locations in particular, they really raise the production value. But they also, they really impact scheduling. So, you're kind of at the mercy of when you can get into any given.
Yeah, it's almost like
space.
film is like a myriad of negotiations,
Definitely.
and it's like a
And that's really
Jenga
a kind of
game
the
or whatever.
producer role. I was finding more and more that it was constantly negotiating and trying to find common ground, or incentivize people to come on board to this very ephemeral kind of project that's not, that doesn't have big movie stars in it, and it's a vision. So it really was a kind of that manifestation. You always have to be in this very proactive, again, true believers kind of headspace, and building momentum around it. And eventually, when you get those allies, like, be it a developer or an architect, or people that are kind of more in positions of influence, you got to drop that name. You got to you got to leverage it as much as you can,
Yeah.
It sounds terrible, but that's kind of how
It's you're back when your back's against the wall.
your back's against the wall. We got to get this location. So it's all about being,
It's about being inventive and resourceful, and also being quick on your feet to see opportunities as they're coming to you. And sometimes you got to take no for an answer, but also sometimes there's often a way to make something work, and always just keep thinking about how can this. What is the transaction? Is the transaction about money, or is the transaction about helping out someone's son? It's
right.
like there's just
there's always it's not always right in front of you, and sometimes it presents itself, and it presents itself in a way that's unexpected, and you have to seize that moment. So those are kind of this. But speaking of taking no for an answer, one of the other memories of this was. Well, for one, we made the most of this location. We actually used every inch of it. The upstairs of that condo we used for the bad guy's apartment, for Wes's condo. But what we didn't have was the exterior of Wes's condo, and so it was one of the last things. Was kind of later in the shoot, and we didn't have a location for it yet. And it was really just a simple shot of him entering. It was kind of an entering and exiting, and there was the character of Dylan has to infiltrate the garage, and so there was all this activity outside of a building, and so we were looking for something that was also kind of would fit the character
The
of
tone
Les,
of
sort
the villain.
kind of a more masculine, maybe more kind of brutalist, cement or just hard looking place. And there was another place in the Pearl District that had that look. So called the people in charge of that building and got on the phone with someone. And I don't know if they were the top person or some mid-level individual, and pleaded the case on, hey, we're looking for this location and we're doing this. We've shot here and we're filming over here and there, and it's this really exciting project. And out of the blue, the woman asked me,
What character lives in the building?
yeah, what character lives in the building? Who are they? And how does the building play a part in the film? And this is one of those things I'd found out early on. You got to be completely transparent. And so we basically, it was like, it's the apartment of the bad guy. and
The what?
The what? The bad guy? What do you mean bad guy? So, well, he's a kind of a complicated character. He's, and in my mind, I'm going, there's no way to spin this, but other than it's played by our Hollywood, heavy, Mogolini, and he's been in this movie and that movie, and so it was a very difficult spin. And she basically, kindly said, no, that's not something we would want to participate in. No problem. Understood. And, accepted no for an answer. There was no negotiation beyond that. You just have to let it go. And hung up the phone and kind of, stepped away, kind of thought, okay, I'll come back to this, got busy with other things. And about an hour later, phone rings, same woman, they changed their mind. And really, I didn't even ask why. I just was like, okay, great.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where, I can only speculate, but, that maybe they realized there was more positive than negative to come out of it. But, you'll never know. But I think the takeaway from that was accept no. I think by being courteous, by being friendly, by not sending any negative, pushing back or any of that, just accept it for what it is and respect their choice and move on.
Another kind of funny little detail that I do recall, and I don't remember who the conversation was with, but of course, each time, they would ask about the film, of course, especially these developers and people, these locations, they're like, what are you going to do here? And we described the story, it's an identity theft thriller. And of course, immediately people would be very conscious of is there a murder? Is there horror? Is there, how explicit or extreme is this going to be? And of course, in the story, there is a murder and there is, there's some scary, suspenseful stuff. But Arnold found this like the perfect answer to it. And it was it's nothing that you wouldn't see on broadcast TV.
That's right.
And that sounds so innocent.
Right.
But at the time, it was I think it was NCI, and what was it?
Well, I mean,
they're all these autopsy. I mean,
oh yeah.
TV has gotten so explicit and violent, but somehow just by saying it's nothing you wouldn't see on mainstream TV.
Just framing it that way.
People are like, oh, okay, this is going to be more just kind of,
It put people at ease.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a context people could kind of, feel that was, safe.
So it's kind of more once again, find the language that kind of can
kind of neutralize
the, stress about what you're doing.
Right.
I mean,
that's right. Because I a lot of times it's just about choice of words and tone and people
and enthusiasm
because people kind of move to a negative, and you just, where's the positive? Where's the proactive positive spin?
Yeah.
And and try to have that come from a real place, but once you have a talking point that works,
keep
use it for all it's worth.
So really the final major location that we had to find was the opening scene of our film that takes place in an airport. And for our budget, we were like, well, how are we going to recreate or create an international airport? And on a previous project, we had shot a faux airport scene in a large kind of atrium building that had this big open space, and it kind of played like like an airport could. You could kind of imagine it as an
Like a
airport.
TSA security.
TSA security thing, but also like a kind of concourse
Right.
where people are sitting and waiting for planes. And so it was really our first thought. But amidst all of that, somebody was like, well, why not shoot it at the Portland International Airport? And we were kind of like, well, we're a low budget indie
As
film.
if, right? Yeah.
How is that going to be possible? But then we kind of went, well, gosh, I guess it doesn't hurt to ask,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't remember who. I was probably.
I kind of
Stephanie.
feel like it was Stephanie.
Yeah.
And there was a person out there in charge of kind of
a
PR
liaison.
for PR and media. And probably someone who dealt mostly with like the news and kind of local reporting and that sort of thing. So this was certainly a unique ask. But at the time, they were open to it.
Yeah.
And it was a hefty fee.
Yeah.
And that was something we had to really factor in, because it was like, for the locations budget, it ate up, maybe around half of it. But we thought, well, this is going to kind of set the tone of the film. And we thought, it's worth the
investment. Yeah.
the investment.
Yeah.
And so we got in there, and it was kind of what felt like a miracle. But sometimes I guess, like you said, it never hurts to ask.
Another aspect about doing a low budget film is really thinking about what you're going to put in front of the camera. Because if you can't necessarily, buy the beauty of your film, you can find it, you can frame it up. And with what we were doing here was looking for locations and spaces that we could point that camera towards and, essentially art direct it through the choices of what we framed up in the film. And by virtue of getting access to these various showrooms and architecture firms and this architectural world, it enabled us to create a film that has a very high looking production value to it, with very limited resources. And I think a lot of that just comes down to just intentionality and choice. What are you going to be looking at, and going after those things that you can frame up in your film to elevate it through the world around you. So now that we had all of the locations locked in, we had our incredible airport location and all of the beautiful architectural locations that the architecture community and development community helped us lock in. We were basically ready to start shooting our movie. So check out this next episode here as we dive into the many challenges we faced in the production phase of making Altered Ego.